Episode 5. I liked episode 5. I liked doing all of them, but episode 5 for me felt like some of the ties were coming together. There was so much information to sort of talk about, and so to actually sidestep that a little bit and actually look at different people of interest, that I felt was quite refreshing. It felt like it added the kind of why I was doing this. Do you know what I mean? Because up until that point, I'd sort of really just been going through the evidence on what had been presented at trial and who Jodi was and who Luke was. And this actually offered potentially, I say, another person of interest aside from Luke.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't remember this. I couldn't get this right in my head. So there was five DNA samples found on Jodi.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew one of them was Stephen.
Mm.
Was there another one that was a local offender? Was that right?
So there were other people of interest. So there were 5 DNA profiles on Jodi. Most of them were unknown. So there was the DNA from Stephen Kelly that we just discussed, that apparently came from the T-shirt from her sister. And then there was the condom, as we've talked about as well. So there was sperm on Jodi. There was sperm heads and semen, and they were in different areas on her. The amounts were small, but they were there. So again, most of those have remained unknown. And the only 2 that we have confirmed is Stephen Kelly, and then in the condom, that was the local sex offender.
That's the local sex offender. I was getting mixed up there.
Oh, sorry, no. So that's the guys in the condom, and I think now, I mean, we can name him. It's public knowledge, and it's in there. So his name's James Faulkner, and he did actually go to the paper to defend his innocence.
Just tell me all about this guy. This was crazy.
Well, yes. So there was fresh semen found in a condom. I think it was 50 feet or something from Jodi's body. Now, at the time when they found this, James Faulkner was not on the DNA register. I don't know if he'd committed any crimes previously, but his DNA wasn't in the system. So when they ran it, it didn't hit any matches. Didn't match Luke, didn't match anybody. So it was just an unknown male profile at that time.
Is that why it didn't know about him at the trial? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah, okay. Because they didn't know who it was. Okay. And it was 3 years later when he was convicted of another offence that obviously his database went in, and then there was a match. When he was questioned, and he said, that he did that. And then what was really bizarre is, like you just said, the following night, having known that, Jodi's body had lied there overnight and there'd been a big crime scene, that he went back and did it again. Yeah. Very, very, very odd behaviour.
Why would he admit that? Why would he?
I have no idea. I mean, why would you do it in the first place? Yeah. He said it was to have privacy, but I mean, God, you live in small town Scotland. There's plenty of other places you could have gone, not that tiny patch of woodland. Yeah. Or, there was no reason to do it there. Just go in the shower like everyone else. I don't know if that's what people do, but
it's like everyone else.
Not on a crime scene where because you're disrespecting that that young girl's last place alive. It's just barbaric, really is. When he was questioned at first, though, it's important to know that, because he said he did this between 8 and 9 p.m. And then when he was questioned, he said that his friend had given him the condom. But when they asked his friend, he said, no, I didn't give him a condom. So then James was probed further, and he said, well, I had to say something, didn't I? And it's like, well, no, I mean, he didn't really. So I find that whole situation incredibly weird.
Really?
And that information has been out in the public domain for quite a while, actually. There are actually, posts that people are talking about this in depth online. And I did read through it, and lots of people were speculating. And, again, the fact that Jodi's crime scene was never considered a sexually motivated assault and murder, is very strange anyway. Yes. He did actually speak out, which a lot of the other persons of interest have not. And he was, he was openly said to the police, this is what I did. I went for this. Oh God, I'm sorry, mum or dad, if you're listening, posh wank, And that always was a bit icky. But yeah, the rest of the DNA is unknown.
The only other thing I could think of then was maybe her body wasn't there at that time because they weren't sure whether maybe she'd been killed somewhere else. So maybe she wasn't there. But it's still bloody weird. You went back to the same place the night after. You can't get away from that. But
yeah, I think it would. I've always been convinced that, you know, she was killed there.
What about the blood, though? Do you think I suppose we didn't get to the crime scene until the early hours of the morning, so
that's right. And there was participation,
and she was moved as well, wasn't she?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, it's that path, Roansdyke path, the one that goes between two. I spoke to quite a few locals, and it, you know, it's a path that people use all the time. It's the main path. Yeah. And also that hole in the wall, which is how they would have had to have got there in the first place. It's actually really high up. It's on the thumbnail for my podcast. You can see it. And, you know, you'd have to really, you know, hoist yourself up to get over it. You couldn't just step over it.
That's the only way into that, to the trees in the wooded area.
Into that part, yeah, from the path, which is where she was seen, or where, you know, where witnesses had seen her walking to. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, see, in my mind, that's good to know, because in my mind, I'd painted it that, you know, there was houses over that way, and you could walk from the houses in a different direction, you know, towards. So that's good. Okay, I just painted it different.
Do you know what? It's worth having a look on Google Earth, because it doesn't look how I expected it to look. And actually, I remember when I first started talking to Sandra Lean, she sent me a sort of diagram that she had drawn of, you know, the path and what it looks like. And, you know, I then went on to Google Earth and had a look from above. And then I had a look on Street View. And, you know, it's weird. I thought it was really, really secluded, but actually, no. I mean, it's in close proximity to houses, to roads, to a big field that, you know, goes over towards, I think it's the university that's on the back. So it's a really... It's weird. I would just suggest anyone that's got a real interest in this case, I would go and have a search for the Roansdyke path. That's ROAN and then DYKE path in Dalkeith. Have a look at that, and you'll see the hole in the wall, and you'll see where she was found.
So then the other one was Joseph Jones. What again? That was he was following her. He was seen behind her. Oh God! And yet. So he's mentioned that he'd attacked her before and he didn't like her. Why? What was going on there? What was the dynamic there?
Quite complex mental health issues. From what I've seen, he's diagnosed schizophrenic. So on the Murder in a Small Town documentary on Channel 5, they didn't name him. They did suggest it was someone close to Jodi, and they described him as a stocky man. And then it was leaked online, and suddenly the whole world knew who it was. And now, you know, there are so many, I've seen countless posts on Twitter, on Facebook, of current pictures of Jodi's brother, and sort of naming him and saying he was the stocky man. And people came forward and said that he had attacked her before, that he had an obsession with knives, that he had caused injuries with knives before. And my thought was that, you know, the reason this wasn't talked about on the Channel 5 podcast was because he was a vulnerable person, right, because of his mental health issues. But seemingly now, you know, I don't know who leaked it, but it has been leaked countless times over. Joseph Jones has never spoken to the media. His mum's never spoken to the media, which is absolutely their prerogative, and doesn't prove or disprove anything. But it's just something else to add. So there were two witnesses that saw a stocky man following her from the house up to the road that she would have taken down to the path. It's also worth saying that he had an appointment with his mental health worker on that day that Jodi was killed, and that he cancelled it. And the reason he had it is because he had been having psychotic episodes.
And he was just ruled out. Did the police know it was him at the time then? The police knew he was the stocky man even though it wasn't reported?
I don't know that, actually. I don't know how far they went into questioning him or investigating him, because I never read any of his statements. I never had access to that. But what I would say is that given the amount of time and effort they were putting into Luke from day one, even if there were other suspects, or, well, you're not supposed to say suspects. Someone told me that the other day. You're supposed to say persons of interest, but okay, so other persons of interest. Then I don't know how much they would have delved into it if they were already kind of convinced that they had the right person in Luke.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I agree with you. But still, seen close by her there's a violence. He's been violent before. He was, Jesus.
I do know what his alibi was, though. His alibi was exactly the same as Luke's, that he was at home with his mum.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. And yet Luke's mum and brother were questioned and they were charged with lying, and their one, Joseph's, was just taken as given.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Double standards. Again, though, why? Luke, he wasn't known to the police. I mean, it's a small area. Did somebody take a dislike to him? What the hell? Why did they fixate on him?
I wish I had that answer. I think, if you just looked on paper at who looks like a good fit for this murder, somebody who's, I'm not implicated. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know who did it, but I would just think I would probably spend quite a lot of time looking at the person who did have a history of violence and schizophrenia, which led to psychotic episodes, purely just because, the pathologist had said this was this was done in a fit of rage, almost, psychosis even. So, because it was so brutal, I definitely think, had I been investigating, it definitely would have been a priority for me.
And that's all we're saying. We're not saying this is a suspect or somebody we could be interested in. We're just saying, did you look into them? If you'd just given them the same amount of attention as you had Luke and still come out with the same conclusion, then this speculation wouldn't be going on.
Absolutely.
It's just, look at these people.
Yeah.
And then there was the moped boys as well.
Yes. So
that was her cousin, wasn't it?
So her cousin and her second cousin. Yeah.
Right.
So they're both related to her. Low-level drug dealers, and they're just seen by two separate independent witnesses on the field driving their mopeds around that leads onto the path. So that was, definitely, again, just I don't know how much they looked into that. I don't know.
It's just people that were in the area. They were in the damn area. Yeah, it's just looking at them. Yeah.
I think the thing that everyone sort of where alarm bells started to ring was that one of them, John Ferris, Jodi's cousin, he didn't tell the police that he was at that path until 5 days after the murder. So if I knew my cousin had been killed on that path, I would have said, oh my God, I was there. And I'd be trying to really rack my brains to think, did I see anybody else?
Yeah.
And then they actually only came forward because these other witnesses who I think I'm almost certain it was two witnesses from like a business or something that was placed near the field. And you know what mopeds are like. They're so blooming loud, aren't they? They looked out and they saw these two. There was two different people that saw them. Oh, no, actually, there was more than that, actually, because more came forward. I think there was about 6 from the same workplace that had said, they'd seen these two boys driving around on a homemade moped as well. One witness actually spotted the moped leaning against the wall of the path and it was unattended. So where were these two boys who had been riding around? Yeah. Where were they when this was left unattended? What were they doing? And then the biggest thing was that John Ferris, he had quite long curly hair. He cut off all his own hair straight afterwards, completely hacked it all off. So that is very, very strange. And something else that also came out when I was talking to a few people and I got one of the statements was that Gordon Dickie's dad, they called him Dickie Senior, he had been along the path that night and he was walking 8 dogs. I mean, that in itself is incredible. But in his statement, he describes going through that V-shape hole in the wall. Now, remember what I said? I said you have to almost hoist yourself up to get into it. I think if I remember correctly, it's 4 feet off the ground with 8 dogs.
Yeah.
So you got 8 dogs.
Yeah.
And they were spaniels, and I used to have a spaniel, so I know what they're like, and they're very energetic. But to get 8 of them through into this woodland, I don't really know why, because I've always had dogs, and we take them on fields. generally.
Yeah, look at them run. They went,
So I don't know, that was just a bit weird. And he put himself there between 5:30 p.m. and 8:30 p.m. That for me always stood out as a very big timeline, especially on that day. You know that someone, because he knew Jodi had been murdered, he knew the family. 5:30 till 8:30, that is a very big time frame. You know roughly when you walk the dogs. I think most nights you'd say, oh well, I normally take them out for their walk at around 6. It could have been any time between 6 and 7. That sounds really plausible, but 5:30 till 8:30 sounds like a long period of time for me.
It does. And also, what stood out for me was the fact he had 5 dogs in the area where Jodi was.
No, he had 8 dogs.
Oh, 8 dogs.
8 dogs.
Well, okay, 8 dogs.
8 dogs,
in
but
the
also
area where Jodi was lying.
And as I said, I had a spaniel, and they can smell. And I don't know if you know this. This is a fun fact that I learned on a pub quiz once. They can smell up to 20. Is it 20 kilometers? 20 kilometers away.
That's a lot.
20 kilometers. And they can even detect things that are up to 40 meters underground.
Oh, wow. But
and
he detect Jodi.
Well, he said he didn't see anything, but he obviously did step through something, because his boot was tested and there was blood found on his shoe.
And was it Jodi's blood?
We don't know.
Damn, that was my question. Because how he could have got it. No, fair enough, he could have got it as he's just walking along, no problem. Yeah. But that would mean Jodi's already there and she's dead. So why did your dogs not say anything, do anything?
Yeah. Yes.
That makes no sense to me at all. Yeah.
This is why this episode for me was one of the most impactful, I think, because there is some stuff with Luke that is, like we've said, the knife pouch and stuff that's dodge. This stuff is just as, if not more questionable. I definitely have a lot of questions, and there doesn't seem to be any answers for them.
No, there's not. I don't get it. See, I've always thought if it doesn't make sense, it's not adding up, then it's not right. There's something wrong.
Something wrong, definitely.
So why was that not? Which made me think that maybe she was killed somewhere else. But if there's blood on his shoe and it was Jodi's blood, then that suggests something else. So it's just, again, not knowing.
Yeah. Yes.
And then there was cannabis found in Jodi's system as well. But this just assumed it was Luke. But the cousins were the drug dealers, weren't they?
That's right.
So she could have been with them, having a wee smoke and something. Oh, it's just speculation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's plausible. It's plausible. They're definitely everything you're saying is thoughts that I've had, definitely.
The other thing there was the scrunchie, the comment about the scrunchie. Was that, what was it? I've forgotten. I've not made a note about that. What was that about again? I usually make my notes and I've just put scrunchie. Well, that's really helpful, Dawn.
Well, no, so basically you've done exactly what a journalist did. So,
that was right.
It was a journalist just wrote it when they had the conversation with Corinne and Luke, but there was no context around it. Yeah. In court, this person said he didn't know why he wrote it at all, or whether he wrote it, whether he said something about it, or whether Luke said something. He just couldn't remember. The prosecution turned it around a little bit and just said, well, he must have been talking about the scrunchie that was found in Jodi's hair. I mean, come on, it was 2003. Most girls did have a scrunchie in their hair. Yeah. And also, Luke, just the position that he found Jodi in, it would have been quite difficult to have seen it. Alice did then, the grandmother did then cradle her body. So I don't even know if he would have seen that. And Luke had said as well, he wouldn't have used the term scrunchy. It wasn't a word that he would have said hairband or something. He wouldn't have said that.
Yeah, it's a girly thing, isn't it, scrunchy?
Yeah. Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
And then there was the clothing description. He mentioned she was asked what she was wearing. They worded it wrongly, didn't they? They started to say what was she wearing that day, and then they changed it to night. And he'd said baggy cords. And I put two things here. I was like, well, either they've mixed them up by starting off by saying it's the day and he saw her at school and she was wearing the cords, or was that his first slip up? And he's like, oh shit, I can't tell you what she was wearing at night time because I wasn't supposed to see her. I've got two things there, but I don't know.
that one, I just sort of left that open-ended because, again, it's all about interpretation when you were there. So who knows? I mean, there were definitely times when, and I think we might have mentioned this previously, but where the police did try to confuse him, I believe, and I will stand by that, when they would say things, when they were talking about where they usually had sex, where did the sex usually happen? Now that's in the transcript, and he'd say, in my room. And they came back and said, well, every time. And that's not what they said initially. So they're trying to get him to trip over his own words.
Yeah.
And
so the fact they've changed that question, I noticed that you said that from day to night, and he's just got mixed up. I thought that, but I thought, or was that your first slip up?
Yeah.
I didn't think that.
Yeah.
You said it was a 42-day trial, and there was so much, obviously, put forward. Is there anything you can think of that you haven't said that made you think, is there anything in there again that you thought?
No, I mean, I just think the conviction is unsafe. I think that's probably as far as I can say without being a detective and without, having a qualification other than journalism. I just think it's unsafe. And there is a lot. Someone said in the case, actually, I interviewed someone who does media law, and we were talking about trial by media. And I said to him, why do you think Luke was found guilty? And he said it was the fact that there was lots of little bits of circumstantial evidence. But he was like, but actually none of them were very big. None of them made you sit up and go, oh yeah, that's convincing. They were very, very, very tiny pieces of circumstantial evidence that continued to build. And that was possibly the reason that he was found guilty.
I'm just thinking about the jury as well. They might have had, like us, they might have had questions. They maybe wanted to know more about the parka or the knife, but they don't have the opportunity to ask that. They just have to hope that the defence is going to bring it up so that they can talk about it. So they might have just had to go with what they've been told. So it could have been maybe wanted to know more as well, so they could make that decision, more clearer. So
there is somebody called Scott Forbes. So Scott, I haven't actually ever spoken to him personally. He's someone that did some kind of legal training, and he now is one of Luke's main supporters. He was on the Channel 5 documentary, and he was being interviewed by Michael Neal and John Sallins, who are two retired police detectives who were re-examining the case for the purpose of the documentary. And they were looking at other potential suspects. And Scott is interviewed by them and says, can you tell us a bit about what you've heard? And he says, well, I had a friend called Mark Kane. And Mark Kane was known to use drugs. I think he had some mental health issues as well. And he was on a cocktail of drugs, allegedly. This is all allegedly. This is from Scott. The night that Jodi died, he lived very, very close to the crime scene. There was a field that kind of separated Mark Kane from where she was found. And he was doing a methadone program at the time, and he was a student at New Battle College. And that was what was minutes from the crime scene. And he was found the next day. He saw Scott, and he said he had scratches all on his face. And, he sort of alludes to, the fact that he knew a girl was killed in the woods. So they interview him. And when you see a picture of Mark Kane, he looks exactly like Luke. He's got long hair. He's the same kind of complexion, the same kind of build. Mark died in 2018. His mum, I think her name was Norma, she found him dead in a chair, and his cause of death was never confirmed, but he had done drugs. Potentially that could have been a factor there. Who knows? But that was someone who, that obviously definitely raised flags.
Do you think, just your personal opinion, that Luke is doing the right thing by saying he's not going to say he's guilty for a murder he says he didn't commit? Do you think that's the right, just personally, it's not his opinion. Do you think that's the right way to go, or would you suck it up and just say, all right, I did it just to get out?
No, I wouldn't. I'll tell you why. I know it's really hard. The thing is, there's a couple of reasons that I understand why Luke is, there's 3 reasons I think Luke is doing this. Number 1, he says he's not going to admit to something that he hasn't done. Number 2, he's not got a life outside of prison, you know, because he was incarcerated at such a young age. So he's not got kids on the outside. He's not got a partner on the outside. You know, his mother is very ill. He's got a father and brother, but, you know, that's not enough to keep him doing that. But I think the main reason is, and this is what he has said to us on the podcast, that if he admits it, then if someone else did kill Jodi, they get away with it.
Mm.
And they're still out there. And one thing that I have always, as soon as I find any sort of time, and I know that it's something that Luke's team have looked into before, is whether there's any other murders that sort of fit the MO, you know, fit kind of the way that Jodi was killed. Is there anyone else that has been murdered where there's an unsolved case, or maybe even a solved case, where that killer could have also have killed Jodi?
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because
to look into. But my God, that would be a big undertaking.
Yeah, it would. But yeah, you're right, because it's unusual, isn't it, that you do it once and then you don't keep going if you get away with it, especially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sandra Lee, obviously, she, you know, heard of the case, and she had 2 young daughters at the same age as Jodi, and she said it just didn't sit right with her. She just knew there was something not right. Was there anything she'd heard, you know, locally, you know, living in that area, that maybe made her think that? Why did she think that when everybody else was thinking the worst at that time? Did she mention?
She just sort of said that when she started to look into the case they had against him, and I think she was quite shocked that he had been named in the papers, you know, and that he was also, I think what also resonated with her was that Luke was the same age as her daughters as well. So to see this kind of trial by media, and then to investigate, you know, to sort of look into the points of the case and what they said they had against him. And then she got in touch with his family, and she spoke to Corinne, and she met Luke, and it kind of snowballed from there, really. But I think her initial interest in it was, you know, wow, this is absolutely awful. I want to protect my children. So I want to find out more about it, because she wanted to be reassured that there wasn't some mad serial killer on the loose, you know, who was going to start targeting other teenagers in the area. So I think her initial sort of look into this case was almost spurred on by her wanting to just be sure that her own children were safe. And the more she got into it and more the layers came off, you know, she felt compelled to do something.
Interesting. Okay. I'm glad she did, mind. I bet you Luke's glad she did as well.
Yeah,
he's got a friend there, I think, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Does Sandra work with anybody else? Or is it just Luke she focuses on, you know, for miscarriages?
She has in the past. She has in the past, but at the moment she's just working on Luke's case.
Did you hear from anybody at all after your episodes came out? Did anybody reach out and say anything to you one way or the other? Or did you have nothing?
No. And people who were from the area did start to sort of try and engage on social media. I've never put a kind of email address out or anything, because my worry is that people might, if they do come to me with any information, then that could potentially hinder a case. So I try to kind of put it out there, and then kind of try and signpost everyone, you know, and say, if you know anything about this, you know, call the, you know, whatever police force it's under, or, you know, Crime Stoppers especially.
Yep.
I always try and refer people to them. I think that this case, there are groups that are set up. There's a Facebook group in particular. And because Luke's legal team and criminologists, they're all very much in the public domain. They speak very openly about the case, and they constantly appeal for information from people. So I think that, you know, had anyone been moved to come forward before now, that they probably would have done it via one of these Facebook groups, or, you know, directly to maybe Sandra Lean or to somebody like that, or his lawyer.
Oh, you met Matt Elliott, you spoke to on your podcast, and he mentioned that he was wanting to make a documentary about the case, but then things took a turn and there was a lot going on behind the scenes. What was he meaning? What was he talking about?
It was just kind of legal stuff, what we could say, what we couldn't say. It was also just dynamics. And I think there was a lot of people that are kind of all fighting towards the same goal, but perhaps on different wavelengths. So Matt has taken a step back from that for the time being. I hope, he's a great filmmaker. He's done some really good other films, and he also works as a videographer. He does stuff for charities. He does stuff for weddings. So I think that's been a bit of a catalyst. And also, he's right down south in England. So he's really, really far away from Scotland. And there were blockades, and, there are things prohibiting Luke from stopping talking to the media. Yeah. So until he's released, I know I got away with it, but, and I know that since Luke has had some videos put out on YouTube that he's done with his team. They've recorded phone calls and they've put them online, because I think he's just a bit sick of not having his say. So yeah, I know for now the documentary is just on pause, but hopefully it will reignite. I think it would be really interesting. But saying that, also Channel 5 did a fantastic job with Murder in a Small Town. Stephen Bennett, who is the director, he did a fantastic job.
Yeah. Was there any repercussions for Luke after speaking with you? Because I know he said that was it the governor he was having a lot of problems with, and
yes, well, with me, luckily, it just seemed to go under the radar. Considering how many downloads it's had, that did surprise me. We are talking hundreds of thousands. But when he put the stuff out on YouTube, yes, there was repercussions. He was actually moved prisons and privileges were taken away. That has now been resolved, but it's rubbish.
Putting things out on social media or speaking to the press is suggesting to them that there's an escalation in its tendencies of violence, blah, blah. But why is he being punished? Why is he not allowed to speak? Oh, I don't understand. You're not allowed to do that.
No, you're not supposed to speak. Well, no. I mean, that's okay. So this is something that is definitely for a legal mind. There is a clause that says you can talk to the media once you have been convicted and you are spending your sentence. So, for example, I mean, you might have seen other documentaries where they've spoken to the prisoners in prison. I don't know if it's because, they're still trying to appeal. I'm not sure what their specific reasoning was for doing all that to Luke, but all I know is that it was quite quickly rectified and that he was back in the prison that he was in prior. So I don't know if it was, I mean, maybe it's fear tactics, maybe, the police, or, the jail staff, maybe they're worried about what he's going to say. I don't know. But yeah, luckily at the moment, from what I know, that's kind of gone away now.
Somebody's flexing their muscles, aren't they? Just to say, we're the boss.
That's definitely one theory. Absolutely. Yeah.
He was trying to basically be allowed out to start learning to work outside and, live in the community, be allowed to go out and then come back in the night. And then they put the kibosh on that because they were doing an investigation, a research review. Why are the police? Why do they have such a obsession about him? If they think he did it, he's done his time. Are they scared that he's going to go out and do it again? Is that what they're frightened of? Or are they just, he's caused them nothing but bother, he's been in the spotlight all this time, and they're just going to make life difficult for him?
It's funny because he's been I've actually seen proof that he has been a good, what you would call a good prisoner. There's not been drugs smuggled in. He's from what we know, he's done educational practices. He's not hurt the guards. He's not caused problems. So I really don't understand. And this is the area that I wish I had more answers to. And I think this is the area that I think Luke wishes he had more answers to as well. All I would say is that I think it's a much smaller system than we perhaps realise. And, I think we flexed that definitely through looking at the Lord Advocate and her being married to the prosecutor. And, it just all feels like a very small network that I don't think anyone's really managed to sort of penetrate.
No, it's clear that the police are still keeping tabs on what he's doing because, they're just putting a stop on him getting any further. So he's still been watched anyway, isn't he?
Someone is, definitely. Yeah, someone is.
I've been dreading asking this question because he was only such a young lad. What was prison like for him at the beginning? Do you know? He mentioned that he was hurt, basically. And do you know anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's been an easy ride for him. I think mentally as well, I think that's been the worst, because this happened, pretty quickly. I'm not talking about sort of the trial, but actually how quickly the suspicion fell on him and how quickly his whole life was uprooted. So if you think, absolutely everything you know about your life and all your security is all of a sudden taken away from you, and you are now completely out of control. Also, if he didn't kill Jodi, just play devil's advocate for a second, then he has witnessed his girlfriend's mutilated body. He's had to call the police. He's had to be with the family when they found out. He's had to hear the screams of her grandmother. Then he's been trialed by media. He has been attacked. He's been followed by paparazzi, and he's then been put into a situation where he now has to all of a sudden know the law. He has to know terminology. He has to deal with a defense attorney. He has to deal with being swabbed and strip searched and put into a cell. Then he's put through trial. And not only was it just a trial, but it was a trial that was absolutely flooded with cameras and with people outside, literally, screaming at him. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the footage, but I mean, it's chaos. It's absolute chaos. And this guy who should be at school is walking through this crowd, and then he goes into a room with, professional lawyers and legal counsel, and he's not even done his GCSEs. And that's all against him. And that, I think, for me, that I will say this actually, and I don't say this lightly, I'm surprised he's still here with us. I'm glad that, he is, because, even if he did do it, well, then prison actually is where he should be, because that ultimately is harder. I say this because I have had several people very, very close to me take their own lives through circumstances that, completely overwhelmed them, that were more simple to describe than this. Just as horrific. Everyone's reason for doing it ultimately is the beast that will get them, and it is absolutely awful. So there is no downplaying absolutely, anything. I actually know someone who took his own life because he lost his job, and that for a lot of people, they might go, "Oh my goodness," but actually you don't know what's going on in that person's head, and you don't know what that job meant to them. So I can't believe that, given everything, that he's still here. I can't believe it. That says a lot. But I do know that mentally, of course, having spent all your formative years really in a prison cell and around much older people than you, he was the baby for a long time. That's really difficult. That's really, really difficult. And to have very limited access to your family and to your friends, your friends are gone, really. The friends were people he had to make in prison. But actually, I do know that from what I remember him saying, he doesn't have massively, really close friends in prison. He just kind of gets along with everyone and just tries to keep himself to himself. So what he does rely on is the contact from people like his legal team and Sandra and some of his supporters that, had never actually met him until they started supporting the case. I know that quite a few of them go to visit him in prison. Some of them write to him. Some of them speak on the phone. So that he does have access to email. So it's obviously a very regulated email, and the emails, I think, are printed off and then they're given to him once they've been scanned and checked. But he does have a group of supporters. And I think as that group of supporters has grown over the years, and something that really made it take off, actually, it was only two years ago when Murder in a Small Town came out. That was the catalyst for a lot of his support. So before that it must have felt very, very isolating. If he did kill Jodi, then there's no sympathy. You reap what you sow. But if he didn't, then my God, what have we put this guy through?
I cannot imagine him going through that and then having, it's that door banging, in the prison cell, and that echo when you're standing there on his first night. What the hell must he have thought if he is innocent? And like you said, I put that, how is he staying so positive? I mean, I know that there was some anger coming out towards the end when he was speaking, but like you said, he was so articulate, it was so intelligent sounding and so positive. He was annoyed at some of the things that were happening, rightly enough, but I don't know how he's done it. I don't know how he's done it.
I don't either, and that call was that there was about, I think, maybe 40 minutes worth of footage. And it, like you say, that was near the end. I mean, that was pretty much the way it was played out in the podcast was pretty much in chronological order of the questions that were put to him. So for him to get angry quite late on, if I was him and I was, saying I did not kill this girl, I did not do this murder, my God, I would have wanted to shout from the rooftops. Yeah. But I do think maybe that's a sign of his intelligence, that he knows that you get more bees with honey, don't you, than anything else. And maybe that's why. But the one thing I will say is I was so surprised at how calm and articulate he was.
Yep, he was.
Because we'd heard those little bits and pieces on Murder in a Small Town. I'd heard little tiny clips, but not massively conversational. They were just sort of little sound bites that were kind of peppered around the rest of the information. Whereas this was really, just in conversation with, really, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was real. He was being very real and open. And it was really compelling. It was interesting listening to him.
Yeah.
But God knows how he's done how blows my mind. He's got some inner strength, I think, because he's managed to not let it consume him. Because it would just, that rage and the anger would consume you. A lot of people, but he seems to have controlled it.
Absolutely. I remember when I put out, that was episode 6 when I spoke to him, and then I had so much kind of footage from him, and I thought, well, I'll just do a bonus episode and I'll put out the rest of the interview. And it was so funny because when I uploaded it, you can see your statistics, can't you? You can see him climb and doing what, and it refreshes the platform I was with. It refreshed every hour. And I remember refreshing it on the first hour, and it had about 10,000 downloads within the first hour. But most of the downloads were for the last episode, which was like bonus episode in Luke's own words. Mm-hmm. And quite a few of them missed episode 6. So they'd kind of come in halfway through the conversation. And it's because, there was all these supporters that were kind of on the brink, waiting for this release. I trailed the podcast. I told them it was coming. I told people that, we were going to hear from Luke directly. And that just, people were waiting for it. And literally the minute it came out, people were listening to it. So it just goes to show that people are really invested in this. They really are.
Yeah. It must be nice for him. It's a shame it's taken from 2 years ago for him really to get that support and see it, because I must have felt so alone.
Yeah. I mean, prison, I can't imagine how awful it must be. I mean, obviously, like I say, if you've committed a crime, then absolutely, that's what it's there for, In fact, I did a podcast episode though on Berwyn Jail, which is in Wales, and it was the first super jail that was built in the UK, and it has loads and thousands and thousands of prisoners, and it's got like a wellness centre and a gym, and everyone's got telephones, and I think you can wear your normal clothes in there. And then there was like something ridiculous, like 18 female guards have been caught having sex with inmates.
Oh, God.
And there have been found everywhere. One poor guy, bless his heart, he had overdosed on spice and he had died in his cell. And because it had been really easy to acquire these drugs and sort of remain for such a long time without supervision, that he'd managed to overdose and die within his cell. And it was awful. And it was one of those jails. And I thought, God, that kind of prison. And there are people in there that have committed some really serious offences, armed robbery, sexual assaults. But it does just sort of blow your mind, doesn't it? It does blow your mind that there are prisons like that, but then there are also prisons that are, done the way that I think we on the outside all think prisons are run. If you haven't been to prison before, or you don't know anyone that's been in prison, then I think we all think they are like what we see on the TV, but sometimes they're not.